J.T Kerr Memorial Baptist Church, Jacksonville, North Carolina. I had stated in our previous session that we would go into the book of Judges. We have, over the past few weeks, started with Genesis, going through the law, and of course, the next section of the Bible would be history. And therefore, we started with Joshua. Joshua taking the children of Israel up to the brink of the promised land, but it was Joshua who carried them into the promised land, and therefore we acknowledge the book of Joshua to begin this section called history, when we consider the first 5 books being law, starting with Joshua. Those 12 books we consider to be history. They go from Joshua to Esther. That would be our history. Everything that happened in the Old Testament, as far as historical, as we get into the promised land, is going to be from Joshua to Esther. Now, keep in mind that there are 17, actually, there are going to be 17 plus 5 books that are included. They're going to have the 5 books of inspirational and 17 books of prophecy. None of that is going to be after Esther. So all of that is going to be, when we say Esther, we're talking about the end of the historical section of the Bible. Questions, comments thus far before we get into start the rolling? I always want to make note of the fact that Joshua is considered to be one of the best narratives of the Old Testament as far as the Jews are concerned. The children of Israel, the book of Joshua, is considered to be the best narrative. The book of Judges is considered to be the worst story, the worst narrative of the children of Israel. And we're going to try to explain why that is. Okay? We know that Joshua is sort of establishing the children of Israel into the promised land. And as we noted over the past couple of sessions, that once they got them in, got them compartmentalized, so to speak, they sectioned them off. Everybody has their own territory. Some are on the seashore, as Israel has a coastal plain. They have a plain, and then they have mountainous areas. They don't have 2 shores like the United States from sea to shining sea. They do have a seashore, they have a coastal, they have a plain, and they have mountains. And so that is why there's a diversity among the children of Israel. Some of them are fishermen. Some of them are goat herders. Some of them are farmers. But that is where the land that they were given, that's how it was given. And the only group that did not have their own land was Levi. All Levites never had an allotment. They were provided for by all of the other tribes. They are the people who are caretakers of the Word of God, caretakers of all that has to do with worship. And so they were not obligated to do any work outside of the church. Now that supposedly has set a precedent. It didn't. It obviously, in some cases, it does. That's why Catholic priests and all of them don't have any jobs, because they're supposed to be taken care of. They followed the precedent. Some of our other religious organizations did not follow that precedent. But that's the way that it was set up. And when we read the Old Testament and the narratives there, especially from the law, those set some precedents. Those set some guidelines. They ought to have an example. This is how you ought to do it. That's the way it was set up. Of course, we deviate a lot. Even in our New Testament, when we get to that, the church was set up a certain way, and there's supposed to be certain elements in there And of course, we're supposed to be trying to do it the way Christ set it up. However, we have deviated. You go some places and Jesus, I heard a minister say one time that if Jesus came back and visited us before he came to take us back, that he wouldn't recognize the church that he established. And that's a bad epitaph for the Christian community. Now, I'm going to give you some facts about Judges that you would have to read the whole book to get it, but I'm going to give you some things that you're not necessarily going to find written there, page by page. But once you read it, you'll say what I'm telling you is a synopsis of what you will read. First of all, we have to note that it's the second chapter of Judges in the 10th verse that tells you what the book of Judges is about. If you read the first chapter and part of the second chapter, it's really a continuation of Joshua. It's a continuation of Joshua because they're still conquering territory. They're still fighting. They're still trying to possess. They've been given the land, but they haven't taken the land. Now, they have been told when Joshua first got it, when Joshua first received the land, God told him that every place that you plant your feet, it'll be yours to possess. All you got to do is follow my law, do what I said do, and you will be blessed. And it has always been that way with God's people. Whenever they followed God's direction, followed God's law, they were victorious, as they were in their first conquest, Jericho. They did not have to use a bow and arrow, a knife, a sword, or a battering ram or anything, and the walls of the city came down. The reason why Jericho was so important is that it was the entrance into the territory, and it was the most strategic place in that whole valley. In other words, if an enemy came, if they did not defeat Jericho, they would never be able to possess the land, because Jericho was a stronghold, and God allowed the children of Israel to take it without warfare. God was the warrior. Let God fight your battles. Everything we do, we're still trying to set a precedent. You don't have to do it if you allow God to be in charge. God will instruct you what to do. They did what God instructed. It sounded crazy. And when God tells you to do something, sometimes it sounds crazy. It sounds opposite of what you think ought to be done. But they were told, you don't have to get your knife, your gun, your sword, and shield. All you have to do is do exactly what I told you. And when you get around and do exactly what I told you, blow the horn. And that's all you have to do. Now, all that sounded crazy to somebody who is going against a fortified structure. But they did exactly what God said do, and they were victorious. So, somebody read for me second chapter of Judges, the 10th verse. The second chapter is where it starts to tell you what the book is about. Like I said, the first chapter and part of the second chapter is a continuation of Joshua, because you see them still trying to possess the land. And if you recall, I told you that there were 3 stages in the book of Judges. The 3 stages I told you were the fact that they first had to divide the land. The first part is it was supposed to conquer the land, then they were supposed to divide the land, and then they were supposed to occupy the land. They didn't do everything God said do. That's why they still have problems. They didn't do what God said do, because God actually gave them a jihad command. Destroy everything, so that the gods of that area wouldn't rise up. In other words, that was the first time that we don't hear the word genocide, and we don't hear the word jihad. But that's exactly what God mandated. Kill everything. That sounded weird. That sounded harsh. You mean you want me to kill the men, women, boys, and girls? Yes. In other words, what's going to happen is the reason why I'm doing that, and I think we've had these kind of questions before, is because they would not follow God. They had established their own gods. And of course, the children of Israel knew that there would be no other God before them. They had a set of guidelines that told them that. The other people did not adhere to that. And as I try to explain, the Ten Commandments was not given to everybody. Ten Commandments was not given to everybody. It was given to the children of Israel under the leadership of Moses. And so everybody today who still wants to follow the Ten Commandments actually is not for you. It's a guideline that they had. It's a guideline, a moral guideline, but it will not save anybody. Okay? So I'm trying to say about genocide, they were following God's Baal. Baal represented rain and fertility, and they worshiped Baal by using a lot of cultic prostitution, is what the author once said. And there were a lot of things going on, going all the way back to when Abraham's nephew had an encounter. They were already practicing those things 300 years later here in Joshua. All right, if we read that in Abraham in Genesis, then that same thing is taking place with everybody except for the people that are under Abraham's covenant. They're doing it differently. Everybody else is doing their own thing, and the people that follow Abraham's covenant are doing it a different way. And that is why when we start reading the Bible, it's going to follow Abraham's seed, not everybody else. All right, so always keep that in mind, because people always ask that question, well, what about everybody else? Well, everybody else had a choice, and they decided to follow false gods, as the New Testament says in Romans, said that you had a knowledge of God, but you chose to follow creation rather than the creator. You created your own gods and built statues of them. And you follow a creation rather than following the creator. So it's reemphasized. All right, now, I had you standing up too long. Read that for me. Keep reading that next one. Okay. All right. That tells you something right there. That was the short version of what I just told you. That's the reason why, is that a whole generation came up who had no knowledge of God, brought them where they had knowledge of it. They didn't care nothing about their ancestor Moses going through the Red Sea. They didn't care nothing about Joshua carrying them through the flood. They didn't care nothing about Joshua doing what God said, and the walls of Jericho came tumbling down. They got their own land now. They can do their own thing. They got the Ten Commandments. They still got it. It's there. It's present. They were raised up on it, but they decided they don't want to do that, just like our generation. All I'm saying is the Bible is the precedent. It tells us what happens, and it's just a cycle. The whole Bible is based on, did you follow what God said, or did you not follow what God said? This happens when you follow what God said. This what happens when you don't do what God said. That's all the Bible is about. And it tries to direct you to the right way, because at the end is your reunion with God. You start down here to get a reunion with God. He gives you all the instructions. Those who don't follow it, they got consequences. Those who do follow it, they have a reward. So consequences sound bad. Consequences are bad, but good results are still consequences, the consequences of you doing good as opposed to doing evil. Yes, ma'am. It's a third generation. It's actually, well, I'll take it back. Joshua would have been the first generation after Moses. All right, now this generation is after Joseph, after Joshua is dead. So that's what we're talking about. Joshua is dead, and they don't even remember. They just say, them old folks, they don't know what they were doing. We're going to do what we're going to do. And that's all they're doing now, and they're doing the same thing. Y'all old folks don't know what to do. This is a new world. This is a new generation. And trying to tell you that they said that back in Joshua time. They said that about Moses. You know, after Moses, that generation died. And Joshua led the new generation. New generation gets settled in, get their territory, and they only help. If you read through the first chapters of Joshua, you see that it's a continuation of the fighting, which they should not have had to do if they had did what God told Joshua to start with. They wouldn't still be fighting. And here we are, their children. Now it said their children grew up, did evil in the sight of God, and they served Balaam. That Balaam is the god that the people who were living there were serving. That's why God wanted them destroyed, so that there would be no temptation for them to fall into. If all of that was cleansed, you start out fresh, you don't have no influence. Now, of course, we have the same influence. Balaam is still existing, but God gives us access to his spirit that we can overcome the wiles of the devil. And we don't have to fall into his snare, but we have to have Christ to do that. They didn't have Christ. They only had an instruction manual. But the instruction manual told them, thou shalt have no other God before me. And it said that they chose Balaam. Okay, so they had a choice, right? Now, here's where we get Judges. Because the first chapter of Judges don't talk about judges. The first chapter of Judges talks about the conquest that Joshua's people and the individual tribes took place, their conquest. That's what's happening. Now, here's where we start getting Judges. It says, and they forsook the Lord God of their fathers, or they chose Balaam, which brought them out of the land of Egypt, and they followed other gods, of the gods of the people that were around about them. So that's why, if you ever get to question yourself about why God wanted them, his people, to cleanse everything, and it sounds very cruel when we look at it today, but if they had done what God said do, they wouldn't have had no problem. Okay, and the same thing with us. If we would do what God say do, we wouldn't have it. We compound our own problems sometimes because we think we're smarter than God. And we know what more than God, and God don't know these people. He don't live with these kind of people. Okay. Sometimes we try to get along with the devil. Okay. And they forsook, and in other words, let's look at this carefully. It said they followed other gods of the gods of the people that were around them, and bowed themselves unto them, and provoked the Lord to anger. God who brought them out of everything. And the Lord, and they forsook the Lord, and they served Baal and Ashtaroth. Those are two different types of gods, but I'm going to tell you something about Ashtaroth. Ashtaroth was a fertility god. Ashtaroth was a fertility god, so sexual activity is how you worship Ashtaroth. And Baal was the god of rain and fertile soil, and so whenever you had a fertile, whenever things seem to grow right and do right for you, then you worship Baal, and then you worship Ashtaroth in the way that you worship Ashtaroth. And when we think back 430 years to Abraham and Lot's nephew, those people were servants of Baal and Ashtoreth. So much so that they wanted to have sexual activity with strangers that came into their assembly. And Lot himself said, I would rather for you to go with my daughters. Y'all need to read it. That's what it said. And they said, we don't want those daughters. we don't want no daughters. Okay. And so all of this is a continuation of how other people are serving everybody but God who created them. And they were given an opportunity too. If you could find actually started with 50, find 50 righteous people. If it sounds like I'm going backwards and forwards, I'm doing that for your benefit. Abraham was told by these messengers of God that if you can find 50 people that are righteous who acknowledge that God is God, we will pass over the city. We let the city continue. We got 50 praying people. We won't destroy. And then, 50 in the whole city. And then before they could get too far down the road, Abraham began to think, ain't nobody there for it. Ain't got no right. Maybe there might be 25. Maybe 25. And the messenger said, okay, 25. If you keep reading, they got down to 5. I'll say that. I know they got down to 10. He bargained down to 10. Maybe it ought to be 10. Couldn't find 10. So it was not just by happenstance that they were destroyed. And almost didn't have 5. Didn't have 5. Because the husbands of his daughters, they didn't go. And his wife didn't go. If they had the husbands and the wife, they would have had 5. They would have been able to save the whole city. Okay? Y'all read that and see if that's not the truth. Okay? Now, here's what happens. And they forsook the Lord, verse 13, and served Baal and Ashtoreth, and the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he delivered them into the hands of spoilers that spoiled them, and he sold them into the hands of their enemies round about them, so that they could not any longer stand before their enemies. In other words, everybody around them took advantage of them. Came in and took whatever. If they grew something in the field, they took it. If they wanted to take their possessions, their women, they just did it. But then, if you read continuously, here's where the judges come in. And I said that last I said judges was kind of like superheroes that God uses because all of them were diverse. None of them had the same qualities. And a judge didn't have to be righteous. I say that again. The judges, God chose people who would deliver. Let me read it, because y'all think I just made it up. And it says, whithersoever they went out, the hand of the Lord was against them for evil, as the Lord had said, and as the Lord had sworn unto them, and they were greatly distressed. In other words, every time that the children of Israel tried to fight back at somebody, they were defeated. As the same way we read Joshua, when Joshua did not follow everything to the letter of what God said, they were defeated. And God's hand is against them now. They can't do anything. Verse 16, the reason why we have judges, not to be confused with the judges in the black robes that sit behind a bench with a gavel. Nevertheless, the Lord raised up judges, and this is what judges do. See, the Bible really tells you what it is if you didn't know. He raised up judges. Why? Which delivered them out of the hand of those that spoiled them. Now, when you see the word spoil, you can't just think about your meat spoiled because you left it out in the refrigerator or something. That's not what it's talking about. A spoil is somebody who destroys you or comes to destroy you. This term in the King James Version of the Bible is used again when people don't pay tithes. It says the spoiler will come to your, if you got a vineyard, the spoiler will attack it. The stuff won't grow no more. It will fall off the vine. Okay, but I'm just showing you that spoiler is used more than one occasion in the Bible, and it all means destruction. Something that comes to destroy you. And so, nevertheless, the Lord raised up judges which delivered them out of the hands of those who spoiled them. And yet they would not hearken to the judges, but they went whoring after other gods. In other words, that's what God felt like they were doing. You're supposed to be married to me. We're supposed to be married to God, right? That's pretty much how that was the depiction of the children of Israel. You're married to God. God is married to the backslider, if you read Jeremiah. He's married to God's people, and God's people always whoring around, is what is being said here. And when the Lord, verse 18, and when the Lord raised up judges, then the Lord was with the judge. Didn't say the judge was righteous. God was with whoever judge he chose. God was with that judge. That means the judge has supernatural ability. He has something special about him. There was something special about the judge that gave them something extraordinary, because it says, but they went, well, let me go down. And when the Lord raised them up judges, then the Lord was with the judges and delivered them out of the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. Whoever that judge was, because there are 13 of them, if God chose them, then during the time that judge was chosen, he delivered the people. And keep in mind that the children of Israel are not united into 12 tribes into one. They're all individualized, because under Joshua, he set them apart, gave them this territory and that territory, and they only maintained their own territory. They didn't go to help their brethren. They were not a united kingdom. They were separate tribes. So you have to keep that in mind while you're reading. I'm going to read this part, and I'm not going to read any more Judges. I'm going to tell you about it. I'm going to tell you about it, then you got to go read it. And it says, for the second part of 18, for it repented the Lord because of their groanings by reason of them that oppressed them and vexed them. In other words, God got tired of them crying and moaning, and well, they were praying, but they were crying and moaning, but they won't turn it from their wicked ways. If my people who are called by my name, if they will humble themselves and pray, turn from their wicked ways, seek my face, then they're ready now. They've already gone through this. And so this is, you need to keep reading that. And I'm going to tell you about the judges, 13 of them. Now, when you read, keep in mind that the book of Judges is not in sequential or chronological order. All right, just in case you like to do chronological order and whatever, as we do with most historical events, they're in chronological order. The book of Judges is not written in chronological order, and it doesn't have to be, because it's not talking about one entity. So my microphone is back on. But you'll keep going and you'll see the way that I'm giving out these names. Those are going to be the order in which they go, because you start seeing Abimelech. If I can get it, it's got to be the 9th chapter of Abimelech. Abimelech is the 9th chapter and going into the 10th chapter. Jephthah, he's in that downward spiral. In other words, they are doing what God told them to do, but their personality, their characteristics are we can look at them and see that they're not godlike. God did not pick them for their righteousness. God did not pick them because they were good people. God had a specific task. They did it. Their personality, their downward spiral, they have to deal with that at another chance. That is why you have to understand this. The gifts of God are without repentance. Keep that in mind, because that don't mean you have to be righteous to get a gift from God. You can do a whole lot of things without acknowledging that God is God. That's just a general term. The gifts of God are without repentance. That is a true and concise statement. But Jephthah, he was on the downward spiral. He was contrary. He was a contrary type person. But he got to record his story. He got to be in it. He got to talk about him because he was doing what was assigned to him to do. Now, one that you have heard, now here's what Jephthah did that makes him so negative. He made a vow to God that if God did a certain task for him, that the first animal or the first living thing that he saw, he would sacrifice to God. And it was his daughter. His daughter came walking through. And so he had to sacrifice his daughter, because that's what he vowed. So you'll read that too. Jephthah's vow is what came. It was a sacrifice that he made that was somewhat hasty. He did not do what he did. But then again, that had nothing to do with his task. His task, he performed the task. But that has to do with his own personality and characteristic, which I'm trying to emphasize, does not mean that all of the judges were righteous. The one that is most famous, and he's the last of the major judges, is Samson. He had the greatest potential, but he was the greatest failure. He did what God assigned him to do, but he had the most, like I'm telling you some stuff that the Bible don't tell. He had the greatest potential, but he was the greatest failure. Okay, we're back again. He was the last of the major judges, and of course at least we've heard the story about judges, about Samuel as a judge. Most of the time you don't hear him mentioned as a judge, but he was a judge. And you say, well, he really was a superhero. God chose him to do that, and he killed many. He was of the tribe of Dan. That's why I said most of the time you would never hear about the tribe Dan unless you read about the Mormons and unless you read about the Latter-day Saints and the Mormons. Danites were warriors, and they were the ones who guarded John Smith and the Mormon leaders who eventually had a kind of a kill squad. Okay. That's a whole nother story. But Danites are what they were called. And Samson was a Danite. And he was given superhuman strength. on various occasions. His job, the Philistines, or what we now know, Palestine, the Philistines are the Palestinians. Palestine and Philistines are the same people, actually. When we talk about Palestine, we're talking about the Philistines, ancient Philistines. They are the same ones who had a giant later on down the line. They had a giant named Goliath that comes during the time of David, during the time of kings. But they were Philistines. But they were the ones who were, at this point in time, attacking the tribe of Dan. Like I said, all the rest of the tribes, they didn't unite to help. Every tribe was independent. And so we know that he killed so many at one time with a bone, a jawbone. Now they've tried to make a couple of movies. I've seen a couple of movies over my 30 plus years, or 40, 50 years of looking at movies, where they try to rationalize this. How did one man kill thousands of soldiers with this bone? And of course, one individual tried to depict it as he was in a narrow area where only 2 or 3 people could get to him at a time. And so he killed everybody that came. He didn't have to go out into the whole mass. That was just their explanation. The Bible only tells us that he killed them. And he had the strength to kill a lion, and of course, that was something he made fun of and caused them more trouble. Got in conflict with a woman that he didn't have any business with because he was one of the children of Israel who was supposed to be adhering to the Levitical law, so he had no business being with a Philistine woman. All right, so, of course, you hear the story, and of course, he discloses what his strength is, and all of that leads to him being blinded. But then, the thing is, I said he had great potential. He did what God assigned him to do. But he killed more Philistines at his death than he did while he was living. His last act was to kill thousands of Philistines while they were in a temple celebrating their God. So that made it a highlight. Well, they were celebrating their God, and his God gave him strength to destroy them, but that was his last act. Okay, question, comments? Now you need to read it and get all the details. Sometimes when you see the movies about him, I've seen at least 3 different Samson movies over the years, but I guess the classic is Victor Mature when he did Samson. Got to be old to know that. But anyway, that pretty much gave you the prototype. But I just saw something that the lady does. She does a lot of movies about Christian things, and there was a black Samson in her movie. She did a black Samson. If you called out her name, I would know it because she does a lot of biblical stories. She directs and sometimes acts in it. Okay, now we go into the minor judges, and that's all we don't even have time for that. I'm going to name them out to you. The minor judges: Shamgar, Tolar, Jair, that's the one you were talking about, Jair, Ibzan, Elon, Abdon. Those would be the last of the judges that we record. I'm going to tell you this so you won't be confused. Samuel is considered to be the last of the judges, even though he's not recorded here. Samuel is considered to be the last of the judges, the first of the priests of the priest class. He's beginning of the priest class. but he's the last of the judges. And what we begin to see is that things are beginning to change because he's the one who is going to be the king maker. He's the one who's going to be the king maker. So we see a transition from judges that go to Samuel, and Samuel is the one who ushers in the era of kings. So chronologically, we are following the path, even though the judges themselves were not in chronological order. Joshua and the judges come next, then Samuel and the kings follow chronologically. Even though we did not put the judges in chronological order, they do fall after Joshua and before Samuel. Keep in mind that Ruth is written there where it is because it was during the time of the judges. Ruth was never a judge. I think our book kind of alludes to that, but that's an error. She just lives during the time of the judges. Questions, comments before we close? I think I've talked enough that my voice is leaving. Yes, question. Did you count them when you read through it, or you saw something that said 15? I'll tell you why that is. I'll tell you something. Because I've got the names of the ones that you're mentioning, but I'll tell you why they were not considered to be judges. Let me give you something to kind of satisfy your fifth number of 15 that you have, because what you've got is, yeah, you don't count them separate. And then, right, because Deborah and Barak go together. And we don't count them as 3 and 4, we count them as just 3, because he was reluctant and he gave Deborah the credit, so Deborah was the judge. And then, of course, as I said, that Samuel would be sort of the last of the judges, even though he's not considered in the book of Judges. He has his own separate, but he was called by God to deliver the people, so he fits that. Micah is listed. Who do you have? Okay. Othniel is the first one. Right. Shamgar. Right. Yeah, it's Tolar. Jer, yeah. Jephthah. Mm-hmm. All right, that's not listed. Mm-mm. Got Ibzan. Spell what you're saying. No, Ephraim would not be one. Ephraim is the leader of a tribe. He's the leader of a tribe. Yeah, Ephraim and Ibzan, we got him. Elon, Abdon, Samson. Well, and he's not. He steals an idol, and he's Moses's grandson, and he leads them into idolatry. So he's not really considered. He was not chosen by God. But you'll see their names in the Bible, yeah. But make sure that they are depicted as such. Like this book that we use right here actually lists Ruth in Judges because he was in the time of Judges, because she was not during the time of Joshua, she was not during the time of Samuel, and she was not during the time of Kings. So she was in the Judges. When we read her story, we'll have to know that it was in the period of Judges. Okay, that's all I can tell you tonight. Now that somebody has a question, we'll answer it. We'll address it anyway. Okay, you put a circle or question mark by those individuals. Okay, that way you can go read them again. Now, you can read the book of Joshua now during this interim and put in the things that I said and see don't they come together. Because as the way they occur in the book of Judges is not chronological. So that's what you have to keep in mind. But we're not following the same tribe the whole way through. But once we get into Samuel, all of Samuel is going to be chronological. All of Ruth is going to be chronological. And when we get into First and Second Chronicles, it's going to be all of that's chronological. That's where we get Chronicles from. Chronicles is a chronology of what is happening. And Chronicles and First and Second Kings are going to pretty much look like Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They're going to be the same story told from a different viewpoint. All right, who has the prayer for this evening? Closing prayer. Okay. That's fine. It's always up there. Thank you, Lord. Amen. We're thanking all of you for coming out and sharing with us. This is the final Bible study for this session. We're going to go out with all the school kids, and we're going to go on a hiatus until school starts back in the fall, almost in the fall. So be blessed. Study over the things that we have addressed, and you'll find that you have more than enough